The glass counter was thick and smudged, a blurry barrier between my trembling hand and the man staring at me with tired, unblinking eyes. He didn't care about my story, not really. He'd seen it 1,000 times. A lifetime of heartbreak reflected in the faded gold of a wedding ring. He slid a small velvet pouch across the counter. The weight of the diamond inside felt like a lie. This was it. The last piece of her, of our life together, was about to become nothing more than a few $100s. I thought of Lowell, my son, and the cold look in his eyes just 3 days ago. He had told me to leave. He had thrown me out, and now he was begging for my yacht. What he didn't know was that my yacht was the one thing in this world that he would never truly own. Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to from? It's easy to look back on a life and see where the seams frayed, where the fabric started to come apart, but you never notice it in the moment. In the moment, it all felt fine. It felt normal. My wife, Maribel, and I, we had built a good life. Not a rich one, but a good one. It was all rooted in the dirt of our small Midwestern town, in the quiet certainty of things that lasted. The house on the hill, the old pickup truck, the worn-out fishing boat we called the Little Skipper. But then there was the Odyssey. The yacht was Maribel's, a strange and magnificent inheritance from her eccentric grandfather. It sat in a private marina on Lake Michigan, a vessel so out of place it felt like a dream. Lowell, my son, had loved it from the first time he saw it. He would run his hands along the mahogany hull, tracing the intricate carvings of sea creatures and strange symbols. He would ask about its history, about the secrets his mother's grandfather had kept. I always told him it was just an old boat, a fancy toy for a man with too much money. I was wrong, of course. I had always been wrong about that boat. We weren't rich. Lowell knew that. He watched me work my hands raw as a master woodworker, building custom cabinets and restoring antique furniture for people who had more money than I could ever imagine. He watched me spend every weekend meticulously caring for the Odyssey, polishing its brass, oiling the wood, and replacing ropes. He saw me put every spare dollar into her maintenance, a silent promise to his mother that I would never let her legacy rot. I was doing it for Maribel, but I was also doing it for him. The yacht was for him. It was a secret I had kept for years, a final, beautiful gift that I was waiting to reveal. I wanted to tell him that one day it would all be his, that he would never have to live a life of hard work, that he could finally have something truly grand. But he had a fire in his belly that I didn't recognize. A hunger that made his eyes gleam when he talked about the future. A hunger that made him look at the Odyssey not with love, but with a different kind of purpose. I saw the first hints of it in the way he would look at the boat, not as a symbol of our family, but as a tool to get something else. I should have seen it as a warning. I remembered the time we were sitting on the deck, the sun setting, casting a warm glow over the water. He was 17, all gangly limbs and nervous energy. He said, "Dad, why do we have this? We could sell it, and you wouldn't have to work so hard. You could retire." I had laughed, a deep, hearty sound that felt a little hollow even then. "Some things aren't for sale, son," I had said. "Some things are more important than money." He had just nodded, but his eyes told me he didn't believe it. He saw the world in spreadsheets and profit margins, in risk and reward, in buying and selling. He saw me as a relic of a different time, a man who believed in sweat and wood and stories. He didn't see the value in the unseen and the whispered secrets of a bygone era. He didn't see the future I was building for him, not with my hands, but with my patience and my faith. I had hoped he would one day understand that the value of the boat would become apparent when I finally told him the truth, but it was a hope built on a foundation of sand. The summer nights were long then, full of the kind of quiet that only comes from knowing your life is stable, that you are building something worthwhile. I would sit on the porch with a glass of iced tea, listening to the cicadas, and watch Lowell in the garage, hunched over a laptop, tapping away at 1,000 lines of code. He was a different breed of man than I was. His hands were clean. His mind was always whirring. He was building his future in a digital world I couldn't understand. I had believed in him. I had believed in his dreams because they were his. I had thought that my support, my love, my constant presence was enough. I had thought that our bond was unbreakable, a rope stronger than any storm. The knots were tied with years of trust, with shared laughter, with silent understanding. But I didn't know that my son was tying different knots, ones of ambition and self-interest, ones that were designed to secure his own future, no matter the cost. He was building his empire on a foundation I hadn't even known existed. The boat was a silent observer, a witness to a slow and subtle change in my son, a change that I was too blind to see. He came to me one evening, his eyes alight with a new kind of fire. He had a look on his face that I hadn't seen before. It was a look of pure, unadulterated purpose. He was a man now, not just a boy. The years had hardened him, had given him a focus that was both thrilling and a little terrifying. He talked about his ideas, about an app that would change how people manage their finances. He used words like disruptive and scalable and monetize. I nodded along, trying to keep up. He said he had a pitch, a big meeting with some venture capitalists, and he needed to look the part. He said he needed to show them he was a man of substance, a man who had more than just an idea. He needed to prove he was worthy of their trust. And in his eyes, I saw him glance at the window, a brief, calculating look towards the marina, a look that wasn't about love for the boat, but about what it represented. The following morning, I went down to the boat with my oilcloth and a bucket of polish. The air was crisp. The sky was a clear, perfect blue. The sun glinted off the brass fittings, and for a moment the world felt right. I was a man with a purpose, with a legacy to protect. I saw my reflection in the polished wood, an old man with tired eyes but a steady hand. I thought of all the years I had spent on this boat, of Maribel's last whispered wish that I take care of it, of the future I had envisioned for Lowell. The yacht was more than a boat, it was a promise. It was a symbol of my love, of my loyalty, of my entire being. I had never once considered selling it, not even in our darkest financial moments. To sell it would be to sell a piece of my soul. I leaned against the rail, a deep sense of peace washing over me. I felt the weight of the years, of the memories, of the secrets. I felt the slow turn of the world, and then my phone rang. It was Lowell, and his voice was different, tighter, more urgent. "Dad, I need a favor," he said. And the peace was gone. The call from Lowell came a week after his triumphant visit to the garage, the air still thick with the residue of his ambition. It was a late-night call, the kind that makes your heart sink before you even answer. He was in his small rented apartment in the city, the background noise a muffled thrum of traffic and distant sirens. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the house or the workshop. He went straight to it. "Dad, my company, my idea, it's going to be huge. But I need capital. I need a lot of capital." His voice was a tight wire, stretched to the breaking point. The veneer of self-assurance was gone, replaced by a desperate raw urgency. I didn't hesitate. My first instinct, as it had always been, was to protect my son, to make his path easier. "Lowell," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it, "I can talk to the bank. I can put the house up for a mortgage. We can get you the money. You're my boy. I'll make sure you get this off the ground." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It was a silence that spoke volumes. I could feel him pulling away, not from the idea, but from my offer. I expected gratitude, maybe some tears, a deep sigh of relief. What I got was a clinical, almost professional response. "No, Dad. We can't do that. That's too risky. This is a big gamble, and I won't risk your home. My business is my business." The words were kind, but they were a wall. He was rejecting not just the money, but the sentiment behind it. He was telling me in his own way that this was his mountain to climb, and he would do it alone. It felt like a small dismissal, a tiny crack in the foundation of our relationship that I tried to ignore. I told myself he was being responsible. I told myself he was protecting me. But deep down, I felt a sting of rejection. The thought of mortgaging the house was a small sacrifice compared to the pride I felt in his vision. I had thought my sacrifice would be a part of his success, but he had no use for it. He wanted to do this himself on his own terms. He kept talking, his voice a low, intense hum. He talked about potential investors, about venture capital firms, about the kind of money that could make or break a person. He said the numbers were staggering. He talked about proving his worth, about not just being a kid with a good idea, but a man with a solid plan. He needed to show them he had the assets to back his ambition. He needed to project power and stability. He needed to look like he belonged in their world. And as he spoke, I realized he was building his identity around this business, around this idea of success. It wasn't just a career for him. It was a defining feature of who he was becoming. He wasn't my son anymore. He was a professional, a founder, a CEO in the making. He was putting on a new skin, one that didn't fit with the life we had built together, with the small, quiet town, with the workshop, with the simple love of a father for his son. I listened, my heart a heavy stone in my chest, and I felt the distance growing between us, a chasm that was widening with every word. The weeks that followed were filled with a tense, expectant energy. Lowell was a ghost on the other end of the phone, always busy, always rushing, always on the brink of something big. He'd call and the conversations would be transactional. He'd ask about the mail, about a document he needed, about a signature on a form. He never asked about me. He never asked about the garden I was tending, or the new piece I was working on in the workshop. He didn't ask about the quiet hours I spent on the Odyssey, polishing the brass and listening to the waves. His world had shrunk to the four walls of his office and the glow of his computer screen. I would stand in the workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and varnish, a smell that had always been my comfort, and I would feel a profound sense of loneliness. I was waiting for him to succeed, waiting for his breakthrough, but I also felt like I was waiting for a stranger. One evening he called, and the anxiety in his voice was palpable. He had a major pitch coming up, a meeting with a group of investors who could make or break his company. He sounded tired and worn out. He said he was flying out to a different state for the meeting and that he was nervous. For a moment, just a fleeting, wonderful moment, I heard my son's voice again. The boy who was afraid of a test, the boy who needed my reassurance. "You'll do great, son," I said. "Just be yourself. They'll see how smart you are." The silence that followed was longer this time. It wasn't a wall. It was a space, a small, fragile opening. "I'm scared, Dad," he said, the words a whisper. "I've put everything into this." My heart ached for him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him it would be okay no matter what happened. But he was 1,000 miles away in a city I had never been to, surrounded by people I didn't know. The next day I went down to the marina, a sense of unease still clinging to me. The sun was hot, the lake was a sheet of glass. I stood on the dock staring at the Odyssey, and for the first time I felt a pang of fear. The yacht, my safe harbor, suddenly felt vulnerable. I knew Lowell had looked at it with a new kind of hunger, but I had convinced myself that my son's ambition would never compromise his heart. I had believed our bond was stronger than his desire for success. I had been so wrong. The boat sat there, a beautiful, silent promise. It was the last link to Maribel, the last piece of my old life that still felt whole. And as I stood there, a cold dread started to settle in my stomach, a premonition that something was coming, that the peace I had felt for so long was about to be shattered. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I knew that the world I had built for myself was about to change. The phone call came in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the workshop, trying to finish a custom kitchen table, my hands covered in sawdust, when the distinct ringtone cut through the quiet. It was Lowell. I picked up, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. "Dad," he said, and his voice was a different sound entirely. It was a high-pitched, breathless laugh. "Dad, we did it. We got a check. It's not the big one, but it's real. It's a first investment." I dropped the piece of sandpaper I was holding. A wave of relief, so strong it nearly buckled my knees, washed over me. I could hear the pure, unadulterated joy in his voice. He had done it. He had succeeded. "That's incredible, son," I shouted into the phone, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I'm so proud of you." The call was a whirlwind of numbers and jargon. He talked about seed funding and angel investors, words that meant nothing to me, but the emotion behind them meant everything. He was happy. He was triumphant. He was my son again. That evening he drove back from the city, a man transformed. He was still wearing the same crumpled suit he'd worn to the meeting, but his face was alight. We sat on the porch, the air cooling, the fireflies starting to come out. He told me the whole story, every detail of the pitch, every question the investors had asked, every nervous moment. He was so excited he was practically vibrating. For a moment the chasm that had opened between us seemed to close. He was a boy telling his father a story, and I was a father listening, proud and full of love. He pulled a thick binder from his bag, filled with legal documents and financial projections. He said, "This is just the beginning, Dad. We're going to change everything." He talked about building a team, about expanding, about taking his company to the next level. And as he spoke, I saw the hunger return to his eyes. But this time, it was a hunger I could understand. A hunger for more. We sat there for hours, the moon climbing higher in the sky. He kept coming back to the numbers, to the projections, to the potential. He kept talking about how much more money they would need to truly scale the business. "We need to show them we're all in, Dad," he said. "We need to show them we have significant assets, that we're not just some fly-by-night startup." He leaned in closer, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've been thinking about the Odyssey." My heart skipped a beat. A cold, familiar dread settled in my stomach. "We could sell it, Dad. We could use the money to fund the next stage. It would show the investors we're serious. It would show them we're willing to sacrifice everything for this." The words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't asking. He was proposing a business deal. The yacht wasn't a family heirloom to him. It was a line item on a spreadsheet. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lowell, we've talked about this. That boat. It's a part of our family. It was your mother's. It's not something you can just sell. He waved his hand dismissively, an impatient gesture that made my blood run cold. Dad, come on. It's a boat. It's just a thing. It's worth a lot of money, and that money could be used to build something real. Something that will last. Something that will change our lives forever. His words were a complete contradiction. He wanted to get rid of the thing that was a part of our family history to build something he thought would last. He couldn't see the irony. He couldn't see the hypocrisy. He was so focused on the future that he was blind to the past. He was willing to sacrifice the love, the memories, and the legacy for a few more numbers in a bank account. I tried to reason with him. I told him about the hours I had spent on the boat, about the promise I had made to his mother. I told him it was a family heirloom, a priceless artifact. But the words were wasted on him. He just stared at me, his eyes hard and unyielding. He couldn't understand. He couldn't feel it. He saw a boat. I saw a legacy. The conversation ended there, in a tense, uncomfortable silence. He left soon after, his car kicking up a cloud of dust as he sped away. The hope I had felt just hours before was gone, replaced by a deep and hollow ache. I was so proud of his success, but I was terrified of the man he was becoming. I was terrified that he was willing to sacrifice the love and history we had shared for a business deal. I was terrified that he would choose the money over the man who had given him everything. I sat on the porch long after he was gone, the crickets chirping, the darkness feeling thicker than usual. I had a terrible premonition that this was not the end of this conversation, that Lowell would be back, and that when he returned he would not be asking. He would be demanding. The days after Lowell's visit were quiet, too quiet. A hollow stillness had settled over the house, the kind of silence that happens after a storm, but you know the wind is still howling in the distance. I tried to lose myself in my work in the smell of wood and varnish, but my hands felt clumsy, and my mind kept drifting back to the boat, to the look in Lowell's eyes when he talked about selling it. I tried to tell myself he was just a young man with big dreams, that he didn't mean to hurt me, but the words echoed in my head. It's just a thing. That's what it was to him. Just a thing. I went to the marina every day, a silent vigil, just to look at it, to feel the comfort of its presence. It sat there, magnificent and serene, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. One afternoon I was at the marina, a bucket of sudsy water and a sponge in my hand, when a familiar voice called out my name. It was Boone. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since his wife Oswin passed away. He was an old friend of Maribel's, a man who had dedicated his life to the arcane art of restoring and appraising old artifacts. He had an eye for things that others overlooked, a quiet certainty about the value of forgotten things. I was happy to see him, a familiar face in a world that felt increasingly foreign. He had a slight stoop to his shoulders, and his hair was thinner, but his eyes were the same. A sharp, intelligent blue that seemed to see right through you. "Jareth," he said, and his voice was a warm, rumbling sound. "I saw your truck. I'm glad I caught you." He walked over to the edge of the dock and stood there, staring at the Odyssey, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at the boat, his gaze sweeping over every detail, every carving, every inch of wood. The silence stretched on, a quiet appreciation that I understood. He was a man who saw stories in things. He saw the history, the lives lived, the hands that had touched them. "She's magnificent," he said at last, the words a low whisper. "She's even more beautiful than I remember." I smiled, a genuine, easy smile for the first time in days. "She's a keeper," I said, a light note in my voice. "She's a part of our family." He nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "I know. Maribel told me the story. She said her grandfather had a special interest in historical replicas. He was a meticulous man, obsessive, almost." My smile faded. He was talking about things I didn't know. Maribel had always been vague about her grandfather's history. He was just a rich old man who had left her a boat. I had never questioned it. I had never needed to. "He was a strange one," I said, trying to make a joke. Boone didn't laugh. He kept his eyes on the hull, his finger tracing one of the intricate carvings of a mythological sea serpent. "Did you ever wonder why the carvings are so detailed?" he asked, his voice low. "I mean, look at this. The scales, the eyes. It's a masterpiece. This isn't just decoration. This is a signature." A prickle of unease ran up my spine. "I just thought it was the style of the time," I said, my voice unsure. He shook his head slowly. "No, Jareth, the style is one thing, but the detail, it's another. This is an homage. This is an artist's touch." a master craftsman's work. He looked at me then, his blue eyes holding mine. I'm not going to say anything more. It's not my place. But I want you to be careful with this boat. It's not just a family heirloom, Jareth. It's a work of art, an extremely valuable one. He didn't say more. He just squeezed my shoulder, a gentle paternal gesture, and walked away, leaving me standing on the dock, my mind reeling. The words he had spoken were a jumble in my head. A masterpiece, a signature, extremely valuable. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. Was this why Lowell wanted to sell it so badly? Did he know something I didn't? I stood there for a long time after Boone was gone, staring at the Odyssey with a new set of eyes. It wasn't just a boat anymore. It was a mystery, a secret that had been sitting in plain sight my entire life. I had always thought of it as a beautiful, sentimental piece, but Boone had put a name on it. He had given it a value I couldn't comprehend. I went home that evening with a new heaviness in my heart, a profound sense of foreboding. The quiet of the house, the rustling of the leaves in the wind, the creak of the floorboards all sounded different. They sounded like a warning. A few weeks went by, a tense and unsettling quiet, settling in, broken only by the occasional text from Lowell. They were always short and to the point, asking a question about a utility bill or a piece of mail. He didn't ask about the boat. I didn't bring it up. The silence was an unspoken ceasefire, a truce that felt more dangerous than any argument. I spent my days in a haze of worry, replaying Boone's words in my head. I had tried to research the boat, to find anything about its history, but Maribel's grandfather had been a man of secrets, and there were no public records of his acquisitions. The Odyssey was a ghost in the annals of history, a phantom ship that existed only in our family's possession. I had a gnawing feeling that Lowell knew something, that his eagerness to sell the boat wasn't just about his ambition, but about a value he had already discovered, a secret he was keeping from me. Then one afternoon, the call came. Lowell's voice was different again. It was slick and professional, devoid of emotion. "Dad, I have a big ask." I braced myself. The familiar dread started to creep into my stomach. "I'm meeting with a major venture capitalist next week, a firm that could change everything for us. They want to see proof of our assets. They want to know we're financially sound, that we have significant collateral to back the investment." I listened, my heart a heavy, sinking stone. I knew where this was going. He was going to ask about the house again, about the boat. He was going to try to sell me a lie wrapped in the language of business. "I've told them about the boat," he said, his voice flat. "I told them it's been in our family for generations. They want to see the registration, the ownership documents, just to verify. It's a formality, Dad. Just a formality." I was standing in the kitchen, a mug of cold coffee in my hand. My mind was racing, 1,000 possibilities spinning at once. A formality? Why would a venture capital firm care about a small yacht owned by a cabinet maker? Something didn't feel right. The words were a smooth performance, a practiced line of deceit. I thought of Boone's warning. I thought of the feeling of unease that had been my constant companion for weeks. But this was my son, the boy I had raised, the boy who was now a man, standing on the precipice of his dreams. How could I say no? How could I be the one to stand in his way? "Lowell," I said, my voice a whisper, "the documents are in the safe. I'll get them for you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, a silence that was a mix of relief and triumph. "Thanks, Dad. I knew I could count on you." He hung up. Just like that. No warmth, no gratitude, just a business transaction. I walked to the study, my feet heavy. The safe was hidden behind a painting of a quiet country road that Maribel had painted years ago. I opened the door, the cold metal a shock to my fingers, and pulled out the manila envelope. Inside were the registration documents, the title, and a few old, yellowed papers from Maribel's grandfather. I stared at them, a sick feeling twisting in my gut. I felt like I was handing over a part of my soul. I felt like I was giving my son a piece of me that he would never understand the value of. I was so convinced that he was just going through the motions, that he was just trying to impress some rich investors, that I didn't see the real truth. I didn't see the depth of his deception. I drove the papers to the city and met Lowell in a sterile coffee shop. He was in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair cut and styled, his face a mask of practiced calm. He looked like a stranger. He took the envelope from me without a word, a brief impersonal nod of thanks, and then he was gone, swallowed by the city, by his ambition, by the life he was building for himself. I stood there for a long time, the taste of betrayal on my tongue. I had given him the keys to the kingdom, and he had taken them without a second thought. I had believed his lie. I had given him what he wanted. I had trusted him, and now I had nothing left but the gnawing fear that I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. That my son had just stolen the most valuable thing I owned, and I had handed it to him with my own two hands. The silence after I gave Lowell the papers was deafening. Days turned into a week. A week turned into two. I called him a few times, but he never answered. His voicemail was full. I tried texting, but my messages went unread. I told myself he was busy, that the meeting was taking up all of his time, that he would call when he had news. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew he was avoiding me. I knew he had what he wanted, and he had no more use for me. The house felt empty. The workshop felt cold. The marina felt like a place I shouldn't be. The sense of dread was a constant companion, a heavy blanket of fear that I couldn't shake. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, a cold sweat on my brow. I would go to the window and look out at the dark, silent world, and I would feel a profound sense of loss, a loss that I couldn't even put a name to yet. Then, one Thursday morning, my phone rang. I saw Lowell's name on the screen, and my heart leapt in my chest. I scrambled to answer it, a desperate, frantic hope filling me. "Lowell?" I said, my voice trembling with a mix of relief and anxiety. His voice was a triumphant roar, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "Dad, we did it! We got it!" he was shouting, laughing, his voice a sound of pure, unbridled euphoria. "We got the investment, $89 million. We're official, we're a real company now." The words hit me like a train. $89 million. It was an amount of money I couldn't even comprehend. It was more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. More money than I could ever earn. More money than I could ever imagine. My knees buckled, and I sat down heavily on a chair, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind reeling. He was still talking, his voice a torrent of words and phrases I didn't understand. He was talking about expansion, about a new office, about hiring a team. He was talking about a life of luxury, about a future free from worry, about a new beginning. "Dad, you'll never have to work again," he shouted into the phone. "You're a millionaire. We're going to live like kings. I'm buying a mansion. I'm buying you a new truck. I'm going to take care of you forever. This is our new life." His words were a blur of promises and dreams. They were the words I had always wanted to hear, but they sounded strange, foreign, and a little terrifying. He had done it. He had succeeded, but I had a terrible sinking feeling that his success was going to be my ruin. I tried to get a word in, to ask him about the documents, about the yacht, about the formality he had mentioned, but he was too excited, too full of his own triumph. "I'll call you later, Dad. I'm flying out to L.A. We're celebrating. I'll call you when I land." And then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the dead phone in my hand, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I was a millionaire. I was rich. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I didn't feel rich. I felt sick. I felt like a man who had just handed over a precious family heirloom for a handful of silver. The feeling of dread was back, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The victory he was celebrating felt like a defeat to me. It felt like the beginning of the end. I stood up and walked to the window. The world outside was the same. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. Life was going on. But for me, nothing was the same. A man who was a millionaire now had no use for his father, or for the quiet, simple life we had built together. I had given him the documents, and he had used them to get rich. I had been a pawn in his game. I had been a stepping stone on his path to success. He had promised me a new life, but I was terrified of what that new life would look like. I was terrified that he would cast me aside, that he would forget the man who had raised him, who had loved him, who had given him everything. The days that followed Lowell's triumphant call were a blur of media headlines and news reports. His company's name was everywhere. Local startup secures $89 million in venture capital. Lowell's vision takes center stage. The pictures showed him smiling, confident, surrounded by men in expensive suits. He looked so happy. He looked so successful. He looked like a stranger. He hadn't called back, not once. I tried to reach him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. His texts went unanswered. He had dropped a grenade into my life and then disappeared, leaving me to deal with the fallout. The silence was a constant reminder of my fear, of my loss, of my betrayal. I kept thinking of his words. You'll never have to work again. They sounded less like a promise and more like a warning. I drove to the marina one morning, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I needed to see the Odyssey. I needed to feel the wood beneath my hands, to smell the salt and the varnish, to remind myself that some things were still real. I turned into the marina parking lot, a feeling of unease settling in my gut. Something was different. The air felt colder. The marina felt empty. I walked down the long, sun-bleached pier, my eyes scanning the slips. My heart began to pound in my ears. I walked faster, my legs feeling weak, a frantic desperation seizing me. I reached the slip where the Odyssey was supposed to be, and I stopped. The slip was empty. The ropes were gone. The water was still. My boat was gone. A cold, icy shock ran through me, a feeling so profound it made me lightheaded. I stood there for a long time, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. I ran to the dockmaster's office, a small, dusty shed at the end of the pier. The dockmaster, a man named Cal, with a kind face and tired eyes, looked up as I burst in. Cal, where is it? Where is my boat? My voice was a choked, desperate whisper. He looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Jareth, he said gently. I thought you knew. They came and got it a few days ago. The bank. They said it was part of a foreclosure. A massive loan was taken out against it. The words were a physical blow. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. A loan, a foreclosure. I didn't understand. I had never taken out a loan on the boat. It was free and clear. It was a family heirloom. I thought of the documents I had given Lowell, the formality he had mentioned. A sick, cold certainty settled in my gut. He hadn't used the papers to show the investors. He had used them to take out a loan. He had used my boat, my legacy, my promise to Maribel, as collateral. He had stolen it. He had stolen it, and I had helped him. I had handed him the keys and watched him walk away with the most precious thing I owned. Cal, who signed the papers? I asked, my voice a strangled sound. He looked at his computer screen, his face grim. Lowell. He had power of attorney. He signed everything. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical pain in my chest. It felt like I had been stabbed in the heart. My own son. He had lied to me. He had used me. He had stolen from me. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I called Lowell. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then his voice, a recorded cheerful message, came on the line. Hey, it's Lowell. I'm probably on a private jet somewhere, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when I land on a tropical island. Ha, just kidding, maybe. My heart twisted in my chest. He was celebrating. He was flying high. And I was standing on a dock, staring at an empty slip, my world in ruins. The irony was a punch to the gut. The money he had promised me, the new life he had promised me, was built on a lie. It was built on the theft of the one thing I couldn't bear to lose. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of shock and rage. I called Lowell a dozen times. Each time, his voice, cheerful and mocking on the answering machine, felt like a fresh cut. I left him angry, desperate messages, my voice a mix of fury and pain. Lowell, where is the boat? What did you do? You have to call me back. But he never did. The silence was his weapon. It was his way of telling me that I was no longer a part of his life, that I was a relic of a past he was eager to leave behind. I was in the middle of packing a box of old books when my phone finally rang. It was Lowell. I snatched it up, my heart a frantic drum in my chest. Lowell, where are you? What have you done with the Odyssey? I shouted into the phone, the words a desperate cry. His voice was cold, calm, and completely devoid of emotion. It was a business voice, the voice of a man who was used to getting his way. Dad, listen, I'm busy. I have investors to impress. I have a company to run. I don't have time for this. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't even going to apologize. He wasn't even going to explain. He was just going to dismiss me. Don't have time. Lowell, you stole my boat. You used my home as collateral for a loan. You took everything from me. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with emotion. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. A cold, calculating pause. Dad, it was a necessary business decision. That boat was a liability. It was just sitting there, losing value. I used it to secure the capital we needed. It was an investment. I'll pay you back. One day, I'll buy you a dozen new boats. The words were an insult. He was telling me that the boat, a family heirloom, a legacy, was a liability. He was telling me that my love for it was a weakness. It wasn't a liability, Lowell. It was your mother's. It was a part of our family. My voice was a whisper now, filled with a deep and hollow ache. You didn't ask. You just took it. There was another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was even colder, even more distant. Dad, I can't have this. I can't have my father, the man I love, distracting me. My future depends on my focus. I need to be all in. I can't have this drama. I can't have this emotional baggage. I need to be focused on my future. And my future is in California. It's not here. It's not with you. The words were a knife twisting in my heart. He was telling me that my love was a burden, that my existence was a distraction. I stumbled back, my hand clutching the countertop for support. Lowell, what are you saying? My voice was barely audible. I'm saying, you need to go. I'm selling the house. I'm moving. I don't have time for this anymore. I'm a successful businessman now. I don't have time for this. But, small town life. I need to move on. My mind went blank. I couldn't process his words. He was selling the house. Our home, the home he grew up in, the home his mother had decorated with her own two hands. The house is not yours to sell, I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury. It's my house. It's my home. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. It's in my name, Dad. You signed the papers years ago. You gave me power of attorney. You gave me everything. You made me the man I am. And now, I'm a man who is too busy for you. He hung up. I stood there for a long time, the dead phone in my hand, the world spinning around me. I had been so blind. I had been so trusting. I had given him everything. I had given him the keys to my kingdom, and he had used them to lock me out. He had sold my boat. He was selling my house. He was leaving me with nothing. The cold, hard truth of his betrayal was a physical weight in my chest, a pain so profound it made me want to collapse. I was a man with no home, no family, and no future. I was a ghost in my own life, a footnote in my son's triumphant story. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in this house, in this town, in this life that had been so brutally taken from me. I had to go. I had to find a way to start over, and I had to find a way to get my boat back. The world outside my window was a blur of green fields and gray highways. I was in my old pickup truck, a rusty, worn-out vehicle that had seen better days, driving away from the only home I had ever known. A few boxes of my belongings were in the back, a meager collection of a life that felt like a distant dream. I had left the house in a daze, a sense of shock and disbelief still clinging to me. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I had just packed a few things and left, a profound and hollow ache in my heart. I was a man with no home, a man with no son, a man with no legacy. The only thing I had left was the memory of a beautiful boat and the feeling of betrayal that was a constant throbbing pain in my chest. I was headed for my sister Raina's place, a small, unassuming house in a nearby town. She was the only person I had left in this world. She was the only person I could trust. I had called her the day before, my voice a choked, broken sound. Raina, he threw me out. He's selling the house. I don't have anywhere to go. She hadn't asked a single question. She had just said, "Come home, Jareth." I'll leave the door unlocked. The words were a lifeline in a sea of despair. I was a man with a shattered life, and my sister was the only one who could put the pieces back together. She was my last hope. She was my only family. I arrived at her house in the late afternoon, the sun a tired orange in the sky. She was waiting for me on the porch, a small, weary woman with a kind face and eyes that held a world of sorrow. She had always been the one to take care of me, to pick me up when I fell. She was the only constant in a life that was now defined by betrayal and loss. I got out of the truck, my legs stiff and tired, and she walked to me and wrapped me in a tight hug. I finally broke. The tears came, a hot, angry torrent of pain and frustration. I cried for my boat. I cried for my home. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for the life that had been so brutally taken from me. She just held me, a silent, comforting presence, and she let me cry until there were no tears left. The days that followed were a quiet blur of grief and numbness. I sat on Raina's porch for hours, staring out at the world, my mind a blank slate. I was a ghost, a man who had lost his purpose, his reason for being. Raina would bring me a cup of coffee, a plate of food, and she would sit with me in silence. She didn't try to make me feel better. She didn't offer advice. She just sat with me, a silent, loving presence, and she let me heal. I tried to call Lowell again, but his number was disconnected. It was a final, brutal cut. He had not only abandoned me, he had severed every single tie. He was gone. He had moved on with his new life, and he had left me behind with nothing. One evening, Raina sat down next to me on the porch, a laptop in her lap. She had a strange look on her face, a mix of sadness and something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Jareth," she said softly, "I think you need to see this." She turned the laptop towards me. On the screen was a news article. It was about a recent auction, a private sale of a collection of rare historical artifacts. My eyes scanned the page, my heart a heavy, sinking stone. I didn't want to see this. I didn't want to feel this pain again. But then my eyes landed on a picture. It was a picture of a boat. It was a picture of the Odyssey, my boat. But it looked different. It was bathed in a different light. It was on a pedestal. It was in a museum. My breath caught in my throat. The headline was a shock. It read, "17th Century Royal Model Ship Sold in Private Auction for a Record-Breaking Amount." I read the article, my mind reeling. It described the boat, its intricate carvings, its mysterious history. It talked about a famous French king who had commissioned the model as a gift for a foreign dignitary. It talked about how the ship had been lost to history, a ghost in the annals of time. And then it talked about its discovery. It talked about its value. A feeling of dread, a cold, icy dread, settled in my gut. My boat wasn't just a boat. It was a historical artifact. It was a masterpiece. It was a treasure, and it was gone. Lowell had stolen it. He had stolen a piece of history, a piece of my family. He had not only taken my boat, he had taken my legacy. The news article about the Odyssey's auction was a blow that left me breathless. It was a moment of profound, terrible clarity. I hadn't just lost a boat, I had lost a piece of history. I had lost a fortune. I had been so focused on the betrayal of a son that I hadn't seen the depth of his greed. He hadn't just taken the boat as collateral for a loan. He had sold it. He had sold it for an unimaginable sum. I looked at the picture on the laptop screen. A strange, beautiful ghost from a different time. It was so elegant, so intricate, so perfect. It was a work of art, and it was gone. My mind went back to Boone, to his words, to his warnings. "It's not just a family heirloom, Jareth. It's a work of art, an extremely valuable one." He had known, he had tried to tell me, but I had been too blind, too trusting, too full of my own grief to listen. I sat there for a long time, the words on the screen a jumble of pain and regret. Raina sat beside me, her hand on my arm, her face filled with a deep and quiet sympathy. "Jareth," she said softly, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I just shook my head, a slow, tired motion. I had no idea either. I had always thought of the boat as a sentimental piece, a beautiful relic from Maribel's grandfather. I had always thought its value was in its history, in its memories. I had never once considered that its value was in a dollar amount that could change a man's life forever. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips. "He knew," I said, the words a raw whisper. Lowell knew. He knew what he was doing. He used me. He used my love for him to get what he wanted. The realization was a punch to the gut. The entire story of the loan, of the formality, of the collateral had been a lie. A carefully crafted deception designed to get the papers he needed to sell the boat. He had looked me in the eye and lied to me. He had used my trust against me. He had sold my legacy for a quick infusion of cash. The anger was a hot, burning fire in my stomach. It was a new kind of anger, not a rage born of betrayal, but a cold, hard fury born of deceit. He had not just taken my boat. He had taken my dignity. He had taken my trust. He had taken my very soul. He had looked at me and seen a mark, a fool, a means to an end. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I felt a new sense of purpose, a cold, hard resolve that had been missing from my life since I had been thrown out of my home. I wasn't going to sit here and mourn. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He had taken everything from me, but he hadn't taken my resolve. I was going to get it back. I was going to fight him. I was going to make him pay for what he had done. I was going to get my boat back. I was going to get my life back. "Raina," I said, my voice low and steady, "I'm going to find Boone. I'm going to find out everything he knows, And then I'm going to hire a lawyer. I'm going to take him to court. Raina looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. Jareth, are you sure about this? He's a powerful man now. He has money. He has a lot of people on his side. I just looked at her, my eyes hard and unyielding. He's not a powerful man, Raina. He's a thief. He's a liar, and he's my son. And he's going to learn a lesson he'll never forget. The anger was a fuel, a fire that was burning away the grief and the numbness. I was a man with a purpose again. I was a man with a mission. He had taken everything from me, but he had given me something in return. He had given me a reason to fight. He had given me a reason to live, and I wasn't going to waste it. The drive to Boone's small, cluttered workshop was a blur. My mind was racing, 1,000 questions spinning in my head. I had a feeling he held the key to everything, that he knew the secret of the Odyssey all along. He had tried to tell me, but I hadn't listened. I hadn't wanted to hear. I was a man who believed in sweat and wood and stories, not in masterpieces and fortunes. I pulled up to his workshop, a small, unassuming building with a rusty old sign that read, Boone's Antiques and Rarities. He was inside, hunched over a workbench, a pair of thick glasses perched on his nose, a piece of wood in his hands. He looked up as I walked in, and his blue eyes, filled with a deep and quiet wisdom, held mine. I knew you'd come back, Jareth, he said, his voice a low, knowing rumble. I knew you'd find out the truth. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, a mix of anger and regret bubbling up in my chest. Boone, what is it? What's the story of the boat? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me it was so valuable? My voice was a choked, desperate sound. He put down the wood and walked over to me, a grave look on his face. Sit down, Jareth. We need to talk. I sat in a rickety old chair, the smell of dust and old wood filling my nostrils. I couldn't tell you, he said softly. It wasn't my secret to tell. It was Maribel's, and her grandfather's. It was a family legacy. He pulled up a chair and sat opposite me, his hands clasped on his knees. Maribel's grandfather, Jace. He wasn't just a rich old man. He was a collector, a curator, a man with a very specific passion. He didn't just buy things. He sought out history. He sought out pieces that had a story to tell, and the Odyssey was his greatest find. He talked for a long time, his voice a slow, deliberate sound. He told me the story of the boat, of its history as a model for a royal fleet, of its loss in a great fire, of its quiet, mysterious survival. He told me that Jace had found it in a dusty, forgotten corner of an antique store, a hidden masterpiece. He had paid a pittance for it, not because he was a fool, but because he was a man who understood the value of things that others had overlooked. He had kept it a secret, a private treasure. He had left it to Maribel as a wedding gift, a symbol of his love, a legacy for the family she was about to build. He wanted you to have it, Boone said softly. He wanted you to be its protector. He wanted you to pass it on to your son, to Lowell. He wanted it to be a secret that only your family would share. He wanted it to be a promise that you would always have something, something so valuable it could never be taken from you. The words were a blow to the gut. It wasn't just a sentimental gift. It was a fortune. It was a legacy. It was a promise. A promise I had just given away to a man who had no use for promises. The betrayal was deeper now, more profound. Lowell hadn't just taken my boat. He had taken a legacy that had been passed down for generations. He had taken a piece of history. He had taken the last, most beautiful gift that Maribel had ever given me. I looked at Boone, my eyes filled with a fresh wave of pain. But he sold it. He sold it at auction. For a fortune. He knew what he was doing. My voice was a raw, choked sound. Boone shook his head slowly, a sad, weary look on his face. No, Jareth. He didn't sell it. That's the other part of the story. He stood up and walked to a cluttered bookshelf, pulling out a thick leather-bound book. He laid it on the workbench, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. It was a catalog from an auction house. He flipped through the pages until he found a picture of the Odyssey. My boat. The headline above the picture read, "Withdrawn from auction." My breath hitched in my throat. The bank pulled it, Boone said softly. The bank that Lowell got the loan from. They realized its true value. It was too valuable to sell. It was a piece of history, a work of art. They were going to hold on to it. They were going to wait until the right buyer came along. They were going to keep it. And now, it's a part of their collection. It's a piece of collateral that's worth more than the entire bank. The revelation was a gut punch. Lowell hadn't sold it. He had just given it away. He had given away a fortune for a loan he didn't even need. He had been a fool. The truth, when it finally hit me, was more devastating than any lie. My son wasn't just a thief, he was an arrogant, short-sighted fool. He had given away a priceless legacy for a temporary gain, a fleeting moment of glory. He had seen a boat and thought it was worth a few $100,000, a piece of collateral for a business loan. He hadn't seen the history, the artistry, the true, immeasurable value of what he had in his hands. He hadn't seen the promise I had been keeping for him. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was now mixed with a deep, crushing sorrow for the son I had raised. He had traded a priceless treasure for a pile of worthless debt. He had taken everything from me and he had gained nothing. I sat there in Boone's workshop, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, and I felt a new sense of purpose settle in my soul. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. It was about getting my legacy back. I wasn't going to let that boat, that piece of my family, that promise to Maribel sit in a bank's vault. I was going to fight for it. I was going to make him see the truth. I was going to make him understand the value of things that can't be bought or sold. Boone, I said, my voice low and steady, I need to know everything. Every single detail. I need to know the bank's name. I need to know the name of the auction house. I need to know who was involved. I need to know everything. He just nodded, a quiet look of understanding on his face. He pulled a chair up to his desk and he began to talk. He talked for hours, his voice a steady, low hum, about the world of collectors and curators, of private auctions and hidden treasures. He told me about the legal loopholes, about the quiet agreements, about the way the rich and powerful move money and assets without a trace. He told me about the lawyers, the bankers, the investors who had surrounded Lowell, who had seen an opportunity and had taken it without a second. He told me about a lawyer named Cassidy, a woman he had worked with on a few cases, a woman who had a reputation for fighting for the little guy. She's a fighter, Jareth, he said. She's not afraid to take on the big guys. She's not afraid to fight for what's right. The words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the vast empty sea of my despair. I had a name. I had a path. I had a fighting chance. I left Boone's workshop with a new resolve. I was no longer a man with no purpose. I was a man with a mission. The grief was still there, a constant companion. But it was now a fuel, a fire that was burning away the sadness and the despair. I drove to the city, the old pickup truck a relic in a world of sleek, new cars. I felt out of place. I felt like a man from a different time, a man with calloused hands and a broken heart. But I was also a man who was fighting for his life, for his legacy, for his family. I was a man who had nothing left to lose. I found Cassidy's office in a small, unassuming building, a quiet oasis in the middle of a bustling city. Her office was a mess of papers and books, a reflection of a mind that was constantly working, constantly moving. She was a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp, intelligent look in her eyes. I told her my story, every painful detail, every heartbreaking turn, every lie and every betrayal. She listened, her face a mask of calm, a silent, steady presence. When I was finished, she just sat there for a long time, her eyes on the papers in front of her. Jareth, she said softly, this is a long shot. They're a big bank. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of lawyers. They'll bury us in paperwork. They'll try to break you. They'll try to make you give up. I just looked at her, a tired, weary look on my face. They already did, I said. I have nothing left to lose. I want my boat back. I want my legacy back. I want to fight for it. She looked at me for a long moment, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. Then we'll fight, she said, her voice low and steady. We'll fight for everything he took from you. We'll fight for your boat. We'll fight for your legacy. We'll fight for your life. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, a single tear of relief and hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a fighter on my side, and I was going to win. While I was building my case, my world a slow grinding wheel of legal documents and painful memories. Lowell was flying high, his life a blur of private jets and luxury. I saw him on social media, a constant barrage of carefully curated images. Lowell in a gleaming white mansion, smiling with a glass of champagne. Lowell on a yacht, a different, larger one, surrounded by beautiful people. Lowell in a tailored suit, standing in front of a shiny new office building with his company's logo emblazoned on the glass. He was living the life he had always wanted. He was living the life he had created. He had what he wanted. He had the money. He had the power. He had the recognition. He had everything. But a life built on a foundation of lies is like a house built on a foundation of sand. It might look beautiful from the outside, but it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. The cracks started to show slowly. At first it was a subtle shift in the tone of the news articles. Lowell's company fails to meet projections. Investors question new business model. The headlines were a silent, steady drip of bad news. Then the social media posts started to change. The pictures were less frequent. The smiles were more forced. The captions were full of a false sense of optimism, a desperate, frantic attempt to convince the world and himself that everything was okay. It wasn't. His business model was flawed. He had spent all the money on a lavish lifestyle, on a false sense of security. He had bought a life that he couldn't afford. The $89 million wasn't a gift. It was a loan. A massive, high-interest loan that was about to come due. He had traded a priceless artifact for a temporary, fleeting moment of glory. And now, the bill was about to come due. I saw the first sign of his downfall on a small, unassuming local news channel. A reporter was standing in front of a gleaming white mansion. The gates locked, the windows dark. The reporter's voice was low and serious. The multi-million-dollar mansion of tech entrepreneur Lowell has been foreclosed on. The company, which recently secured a massive investment, is now facing multiple lawsuits and a mountain of debt. My heart gave a tired, hollow lurch. I didn't feel any sense of victory. I just felt a profound and terrible sadness. He had traded everything for nothing. He had lost his legacy, his family, and now, his life. He had lost it all. The world he had built, the house of cards he had so carefully constructed, was coming down, and I was a helpless witness, watching it all unfold from a distance. A few days later, the news was even worse. His company was being sued by its investors. The venture capital firm was demanding their money back. They were claiming fraud, deceit, and a false business model. The headlines were brutal. Lowell's $89 million empire crumbles. Tech founder facing ruin. He was no longer the boy genius who had conquered the world. He was a cautionary tale. A man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings burned off. He had everything he had ever wanted, and it had all been taken from him in a matter of weeks. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. He had thrown me out of my home, a home that had been in our family for generations, and now, he was being thrown out of the house he had bought with my legacy. He had traded a priceless treasure for a temporary, worthless illusion. I sat on Raina's porch, the sun a gentle, warm presence on my face, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. My case was moving forward. Cassidy was a bulldog, a fighter who was relentless in her pursuit of justice. She was a woman who didn't care about money or power. She only cared about what was right. We were going to get my boat back. We were going to get my legacy back. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about principle. It was about showing him and the world that some things are worth more than a quick buck. And then my phone rang. I looked at the screen, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. A voice, tired and broken, came on the line. "Dad," he said, his voice a choked, desperate whisper. "Dad, I need your help. I'm losing everything. I don't have anywhere to go." The words were a ghost from my own past, a bitter, painful echo. Lowell's voice was a sound I barely recognized. The arrogance, the confidence, the polished sound of a successful businessman was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. "Dad," he said again, his voice cracking, "I'm in trouble. I'm losing everything. The investors are suing me. The bank is foreclosing on my house. I don't have a penny to my name." I listened, my heart a stone in my chest. I felt no joy, no sense of satisfaction. I only felt a deep and terrible sorrow for the man he had become, for the boy I had lost. "Lowell," I said, my voice low and steady, "you're a grown man. You made your own bed." The words were a lie. I had helped him make his bed. I had given him the keys. I had given him everything he had used to throw me out. I was just as complicit in his downfall as he was. He started to cry, a broken, desperate sound that tore at my heart. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I was so blind. I thought the money. I thought it would make everything better. I thought it would make you proud of me." The words were a raw, painful confession. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the boy I had raised was still in there somewhere, buried under a mountain of greed and ambition. But I didn't. Not yet. I had been betrayed once. I wasn't going to be betrayed again. "Lowell," I said, my voice cold, "I can't help you. You made your own choices." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, a pause that was filled with a sense of shock and disbelief. He had expected me to fold. He had expected me to forgive him. He had expected me to be the father he had always known. But that man was gone. He had killed him. He cleared his throat, the sound a desperate, pathetic noise. Dad, I need you to do something for me. I need you to sell the boat. I know you're trying to get it back, but if you do, I can use the money to pay off my debts. I can use the money to start over. Please, Dad, please. It's the only thing I have left. The words were a fresh wound. He still didn't get it. He still saw the boat as a transaction. He still saw it as an asset to liquidate, not as a legacy to protect. He was begging for my yacht, but not for its history, not for its beauty, not for its story. He was begging for its dollar amount. He was begging for the thing that he had thrown away so carelessly. The irony was a punch to the gut. He had thrown me out. He had taken my boat, and now he was begging for it back. I closed my eyes, a deep, weary sigh escaping my lips. Lowell, I said softly, that boat is not for sale. It never was. It was a family heirloom. It was a promise. It was a legacy. It was everything you traded for a fleeting moment of glory. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his choked sobs. A raw, broken sound that tore at my heart. He had lost everything. He had lost his money. He had lost his power. He had lost his dignity. And now he was about to lose the one thing he had fought so hard to get. The one thing that he had so carelessly thrown away. I hung up the phone. I didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need to rub it in. He had learned his lesson. He had learned it the hard way. The meeting was set for a cold, gray afternoon. It was me, Cassidy, and a team of lawyers from the bank that had foreclosed on my boat. We were in a sterile white conference room, the air thick with tension. I hadn't seen Lowell in months, not since that last desperate phone call. I knew he was coming. I knew he was going to beg. I knew he was going to try and get his hands on the boat. I was ready for him. I had rehearsed this in my mind 1,000 times. I had gone over every word, every gesture, every look. I was going to be cold. I was going to be distant. I was going to be a man he didn't recognize. I wasn't going to give in. I was going to get my boat back. I was going to get my life. Then the door opened, and he walked in. He looked different. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, wrinkled shirt. His hair was a mess. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He looked like the boy I had raised, the boy who was afraid of the world. He saw me, and for a brief, fleeting moment, his eyes, filled with a deep and terrible sorrow, held mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The look on his face said it all. He had lost everything, and he was here to beg for it back. We sat down, the air a thick, heavy blanket of silence. Lowell's lawyer, a slick, professional man with a cold, calculating look in his eyes, started to talk. He talked about the loan, about the debt, about the need to sell the yacht to cover his client's losses. He talked about the law, about the contracts, about the fact that Lowell had signed the documents. He was a man who spoke in legal terms, in a language that was designed to intimidate and to confuse. But I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't confused. I was a man with nothing left to lose. Cassidy stood up, her voice a low, steady rumble. "My client is not here to negotiate a deal," she said, her eyes on Lowell's lawyer. "My client is here to reclaim his property." The documents were signed under duress. The boat was taken under false pretenses. The yacht is not a commodity. It is a family heirloom. It is a piece of history, and its true value is far, far more than the loan my client's son received. The lawyer scoffed. "And what value is that, counselor? A few $100,000? $1 million? It's not enough to cover his losses." Cassidy just smiled, a small, cold, knowing smile. "No," she said softly. "It's not, but its true value. Its true value is in the tens of millions of dollars. The bank knew that. You knew that. You were trying to take a priceless piece of history from a man who had no idea what he had in his hands. You were trying to steal a fortune, and you failed." The words were a blow to the entire room. The bank's lawyers looked at each other, their faces pale with shock. They had no idea. They had no idea the boat was so valuable. They had no idea they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. I stood up, my eyes on Lowell. He was staring at the table, his shoulders hunched, his hands clenched tight fists. He was a broken man. "Lowell," I said, my voice low and steady, "I'm taking back the boat." He looked up, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I'll do anything. The words were a plea, a raw, desperate sound that tore at my heart. I looked at him, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who was afraid of the world. I know, I said softly, and I'm taking the yacht back. It's not for sale. It never was. It's our legacy. It's our family's history. It's our promise. The room was silent. The bank's lawyers were defeated. The battle was over. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. A few weeks later, I was back at the marina. The Odyssey was there, in her rightful place, gleaming in the morning sun. The bank had agreed to return it. They had no choice. They had been outsmarted. I was a man with my legacy back, but I was also a man who had lost his son. I was on the deck, a bucket of sudsy water and a sponge in my hand when a voice called out my name. I turned. It was Lowell. He looked different. He looked like he had been through a war. His clothes were clean now, but he was thin, and his eyes were full of a deep, unshakable sorrow. He walked to me, his hands in his pockets, and he stood there, a silent, humble figure. "Dad," he said, his voice a whisper, "I have nowhere to go. I don't have a job. I don't have a home." I looked at him, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to be unforgiving. I wanted to be a man he didn't recognize. But I couldn't. He was my son. "I know," I said softly, "and I've been thinking about that. The bank is paying me a small sum for the damage they did to the boat. I'm going to use it to hire a team of restorers to fix it. We're going to bring it back to its original glory. I need a manager. I need someone to help me. I can't do this alone." He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You mean, the job?" he asked, his voice a choked, desperate sound. I just nodded, a small, tired smile on my face. "It's not much," I said softly. "The pay is terrible. The hours are long. But it's honest work. It's a chance to learn the value of something that can't be bought or sold. It's a chance to work with your hands. It's a chance to find your way back." He looked at the boat, at its magnificent, quiet presence. He looked at me, and his eyes, filled with a deep, silent gratitude, held mine. He had wanted the money. He had wanted the power. He had wanted the glory. But he had learned, in the end, that the only thing that mattered was family, and that the most valuable thing in this world was a second chance.